Here we go. All right. Hey there, folks. Since book tour and conventions have been canceled for a bit, I figured I'd bring book tour to you. So welcome to Russ's Rollercoaster, intriguing interviews with creative minds. Tonight, we have an all-star panel delving into crime, mystery, and seduction. So before we get naughty, let me welcome Chuck Salzberg, a former magazine journalist and nonfiction book writer, as well as a two-time nominee for the Seamus Award for Swan's Last Song and Second Story Man. He is also the author of 4 other Swan novels, including Devil in the Hole, named one of the best crime novels of 2013 by Suspense Magazine. Also on our panel of deviants is R.G. Belsky, a former journalist with the New York Post, New York Daily News, Star Magazine, and NBC News. His newest mystery, The Last Scoop, is the 3rd in a series featuring Claire Carlson, the news director for a New York City TV station. He also writes under the name Dana Perry. And last but not least, SJ Rozan is the author of 16 novels and more than 75 short stories. She has won multiple awards, including the Edgar, Seamus, Anthony Nero, McCavity, Japanese Maltese Falcon, and the Private Eye Writers of America Lifetime Achievement Award. All right, so everyone on the panel is in Manhattan, and I'm in New Jersey. So for those of you who are tuning in, feel free to send me questions in the chat box throughout the hour, and we'll get to some of them at the end. All right, so all of us on the panel here, and for those of you tuning in, we all love crime, mystery, suspense, and stories of seduction and murder. Whoa, try putting that on a resume. So let's kind of get right to it. I'm going to start with you, SJ. What is it about these tales of dark fiction that keep us coming back for more?
I think the thing about crime fiction is that even if the bad guys don't get punished and get away with it and all kinds of terrible things happen, there's always an explanation. Crime fiction is about explanation. We all know terrible things happen all the time. But in real life, they happen and you're stuck with them. You say, why? You know, why did that happen to him? Well, no real reason. In crime fiction, there's always a real reason. So that you can read it and know you'll know why. You'll get an explanation, and that's, I think, why we're here, because you get that in crime fiction, you don't get it in life.
Chuck, how about you?
I think it's I think we all have these crimes inside us, and we most of us, I hope, don't access it. So I think that that people like to read about crime. I think for SJ is right for that. The other thing is that most crime novels are very theological in the sense that something happens, the world is out of order, it's in chaos, and the cop or the newspaper man or whoever it is, when they solve the crime, they put the world back into shape, and I think we like that part of it. Although I don't do it in my books.
And how about SG? How about SG? How about you? RG, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both of those, with what they both said. I just think a crime novel it's in many ways the easiest thing I think to do because it all makes sense. It's orderly. If you sit down and try and write a novel, and I have, you can go in a million ways, but there's something very nice about that. There's a beginning and an end, and there's a story to a crime novel. And I know, a lot of people talk about they got in, how did you start doing crime novels? And the answer generally is, I read Raymond Chandler, or I read Agatha Christie, or somebody like that. And that is true for all of us, including me. I mean, I didn't sit down and say, I was going to write when I started reading other people's stuff and decided to do it. But I also was very inspired by TV because, when you're the Rockford Files and Columbo and all these things. And so when you sit down to write, that's kind of the way I think a lot of us just felt was the story we wanted to tell. And the final thing, when we're talking about good guys and bad guys with it, it reminds me in some ways of the way Westerns used to be. I mean, everything used to be Westerns. You'd have the Marshall Dillon and all that stuff. And then Westerns went away. But I think in some ways the private eye or the police officer or the journalist, is that same kind of role, the guy who brings rule to the unruly.
So order from disorder. So,
yeah.
So look, within crime and mystery, there are all sorts of subgenres within it. So SJ, what kind of subgenres do you prefer the most within the overall structure?
Well, I write a lot of private eye, and so I really like that. But the private eye is not a cop. The private eye is on the outside and is the person you go to when there's moral ambiguity from the beginning of the case. If you know you've been wronged by a bad guy, you could go to a cop. If you're a little not so sure what's going on yourself, or you're a little maybe dirty yourself, you can go to a private eye, and that appeals to me a great deal. I also have recently begun to read a lot of the British police procedurals, which I find much more interesting than American police procedurals, because they get more deeply into the lives of the cops.
Okay.
But
okay.
I'll read anything that is good.
How about you? How about you, Chuck?
I have two different things. I do PI novels, but then I do standalones that don't have anything to do with PIs. And it's really, one of them, Second Story Man's about a master burglar. The other one is about A Devil in the Hole, is about a man who kills his family, which happens before the book starts. It's not a mystery. And what happens to him and how it affects. I'm really interested in character mostly. So even the PI ones they're not murder mysteries. They have to do with character. That's pretty much, so I do both. I just finished one that is a PI novel, but now I'm working on one that's not.
Huh. So I was going to ask this a little bit later, but that's a good segue. So for you, either as the writer or the reader or both, in your crime and mystery fiction, what's more appealing to you? Are you sort of are you more interested in the intricacies of the plot, or is it more about the character? So Chuck, you're already there, so expand on maybe a little bit.
I start with a character. Every single book that I've ever written starts with a character. And I'm much more interested in how that character sees the world, how they exist in the world, and how other people relate to them and to other people in the book. Plot is nothing I know, except for Devil in the Hole, which I knew that I was going to use this true crime, but I had no idea where it was going to go. And that's true of all my books. It starts with a character or a first line.
Huh. RG, how about you?
Well, there's no question about it. It's a character, because I've thought about this a lot. And if there's a really good character that I care about, I will read the book, no matter how good or bad the story is. It can be a really good story, but it would be really difficult for me to read it if I'm not interested in the characters. So I look back on some of the great characters that I've cared about, from Philip Marlowe to, Spencer, Robert Parker. I read all the books. I read every Robert Parker Spencer book. There's like 40 some of them. This might sound awkward or whatever, but I don't think Spencer's plots are that good. The books aren't really that interesting in terms of the story, but they're great books because of the character. And as great a writer as Raymond Chandler is, some of those stories sort of fall apart when you start to actually look at the story, but you don't care because you just get caught up in this world of Philip Marlowe. So look, there are writers. I think Michael Connelly out there today is maybe one of the best in the mystery thing, who has a great character or characters. But, my favorite is Harry Bosch, and tells a great story at the same time. But no question about it. If it's a choice, I'm going for the character every time.
SJ, how about you?
Yeah, absolutely. When people keep returning to a series, they're returning for the characters. They're returning to see what happens to those characters now. When you think, as RG said, about the books you've read, I would be hard put to recount an actual story, an actual plot from pretty much any of the books I've loved best. The plots I can recount are the books I've read where the plot was critical and the characters weren't. But I'm in it for the characters. I'm in it for. It always surprises me that there is an infinite number of ways human beings can react to things. You'd think that we would have gone through them all by now, but we don't. And so, like what Charles was saying about a guy who kills his family, and then what becomes of him, and how that works on him after that. It's fascinating, and so that's what I'm in for, is the characters.
So along that line, and this is one of the questions I wanted to get to, and I think we touched on a little bit, and SJ, keep going. So when your characters are trying to resolve the mystery or kind of get into the crime, do you intend, as the writer or interested as the reader, to see, to reveal more about the characters' point of view, worldview, and, well, their character, kind of challenging their beliefs along the way? Or for you, is it just about crime occurs, mystery abounds, and I want to see how they solve
You want me to take that?
Yes.
Yeah. It is definitely about the character and how they deal with it. Anything that happens in any of my books could happen to someone else in a different book, and it would be handled differently. The book I'm working on now, which is a new character, she tends to go off half-cocked, you might say. She's not an investigator. She's interested in what's happening around her, which is criminal, and she will try something to see if it works. And if it doesn't work, she will jump off the boat and swim and see where she gets. And that character, to me, is really interesting. I haven't done one like her before. If someone else were in the situation she's in, they would react differently. And so I'm interested in seeing how this character can get to the bottom of what's going on without getting herself killed.
Sure. So, fair enough. How about you, Chuck?
Every book's kind of different, but so, and again, because I don't plot anything out, I never really know where I'm going with a particular book until I'm about halfway through. And that's why it's really about character for me.
You even know halfway through. That's
I actually, for most of my books, I don't know the end until I actually get to the last chapter. I have no idea what's going to happen.
And for you, RG, so again,
well, I when I'm writing my current series, The Claire Carlson is a TV news journalist, I'm really telling two stories. I'm telling the crime story, but I'm also telling her story. So a great amount of the things in my book have to do with what goes on in a newsroom, the challenges facing a journalist. The key obviously is to merge those into two. You don't want to just be writing about a crime and not really getting into the character. And of course, you don't want to be just talking about the character and not doing the crime. So most of the time, you can have a situation in which you get into her personal life, but at the same time, there's something to do with the story that advances it. But not always. And I've done chapters. When I first started, I did a whole chapter that had nothing to do with the book because I thought it was a funny scene and a party. And a famous mystery editor at the time, Joan Kahn, read it. And she said, this has nothing to do with the thing. And I said, you want me to take it out? She said, no, it's great. Leave it in. And it's kind of the way I just operate. I try and tell two stories at once. So you're finding out about my character at the same time you're seeing her solve the story. And one final thing, and this difference from different books. All my books that I've had published anyway have always been in the first person. So when you're writing in the first person, you're just telling it from one point of view. So you get a much better feel of that character from the inside because you're inside. In my case, you're inside Claire Carlson's head.
Right. We actually jumped around in my own questions. I wanted to kind of get to that. So and we touched on it a little bit before. So there's lots of different entrance points to the crime and mystery genre, whether it's a private eye, a detective. So for you, RG, you've got a journalist in the newsroom. What's for you? So what's compelling about that for you? Like why I know you're a journalist. I mean, I was as well, and I still work in the news business. Yeah. So.
Well, I wanted to, when they were talking about it earlier, I think it is really interesting different in many ways to do a journalist. I mean, the good part of it, obviously, is I don't have to do any research. I don't have to, because like I've done it all my life. So I can write about the world of journalism very comfortably and easily. But I think having a journalist as your main character creates a lot of problems because, you know, like when you talk about the PI being an outsider and not part of the police, the journalist is even more of an outsider. The journalist has no power to compel anybody to do anything. The journalist doesn't have a gun. The journalist isn't like a lawyer with a subpoena. You know, the journalist can quote freedom of the press, but that's not going to get you very far. So the journalist is really doesn't have the tools that many of the other characters have. And it also always presents a problem for me because, you know, not all books are like this, but most books will end with some sort of, you know, climactic scene that involves a shootout or violence or something like that. And again, if you're a journalist, well, like why? Well, the journalist isn't carrying a gun, so there has to be a reason why they're involved in it. And the final problem you have, and this is where you have to stretch belief a bit, and I've talked about this a lot, is in all my years in journalism, I never knew one journalist who ever solved a murder, ever. You know, I mean, the police solve murders, you cover it, but no journalist I know ever solved a murder. In my books, you know, Clark Carlson solves a murder in every book, you know. But, you know, so we stretch it with police, we stretch it with PIs. But with a journalist, yeah, there are problems you have that you don't have, I think, if you're doing a more traditional character.
How about you, Chuck?
Well, you know, it's funny Dick mentions journalists. I haven't had a journalist main character, but I think of when I do a PI, I think of him or her as a journalist because there's a real crossover between being a journalist and being a detective. You know, a journalist interviews people, follows a story, you know, tries to get to the, you know, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so does a detective. So for instance, especially in Devil in the Hole, which there's no main character, there's like 20, 25 narrators. In my head, they were all telling their story to a journalist. So, I've, you know, it's not because I was a journalist that I do that. It's just because it seems that's the way my mind works to solve things, is to ask questions and collect information. And by the way, I feel really bad that we've got an SJ and an RJG, and I've actually got a name. Next time I'm going with initials.
All right, well, they'll have to rename themselves then.
So anyway, so there is a connection between Dick and me. Is I don't use journalists, except I have my detectives using journalistic tools of the trade.
Yeah, fair enough. And how about you, SJ? What's your, you know, again, I know you do a lot of private eye, but what's your appeal for the private eye as opposed to another type of lead character who has the vantage point of the world?
Well, it's what I said before. It's the moral ambiguity. It's the fact that the private eye is on the outside of both sides, of the good guy side and the bad guy side. He or she is dependent on his or her own moral code. That's what it's about. And this is established in the private eye literature, you know, going back to the guy that Sarah Paretsky referred to as Saint Raymond, which would be Chandler. And so that appeal of the outsider looking at something, taking on a crime that somebody has brought to them, and it usually, what comes to you is the smaller crime, and then things get revealed. And like Charles, I don't know where I'm going when I start, but I do know the world that my private eye is going to enter in the sense of I did a book set in the world of Chinese restaurants and one set in the world of small museums, that kind of thing. So I know the world, and I just start a crime and I just have them go and dig for things. They do, unlike RG, they do have an excuse at the end for the fireworks and the fisticuffs and all that, because that's the kind of people they are. My new character, it's interesting, will not have such an excuse. She's the kind who should have called the police back in chapter 3, and left the whole thing alone. But she didn't. Still, though, RG, I don't know any private eyes who've ever solved a murder either. Every time they come across anything that smells of a body, they call the police and they say, "I think there's a homicide involved in this. I'm out of here."
Well, I would just like to, on that, one of my favorite stories, which I've said a number of times, was from Raymond Chandler, and a critic once, reviewed Philip Marlowe and said, well, he's not a realistic private eye. I mean, private eyes don't get hit over the head every time they walk in a room. They don't get these beautiful blonde things. That's not what a private eye does. And Chandler's response was, I know, but if I did what a private eye did, no one would ever read my books. And I think that's really the basis of what we all do. We're not writing about what really happens. We're taking the basics and we're making it entertaining.
But if you go back to, say, for example, fairy tales, there weren't a lot of goose herds who met handsome princes,
Right.
but nobody wanted to hear about a goose herd going through her day. So it's always been a question of telling people the stories they will be interested in, and not particularly the stories that are the reality of people's day-to-day lives.
So let me ask you, as part of the theme of this panel, so seduction is a recurring element in crime and mystery fiction, whether it's lust or love, sex, or just kind of the thrill of danger or getting away with it. What part of seduction play in the stories that you write, SJ?
Oh, interesting, because I just spent 12 Lydia Chin, Bill Smith books being asked by people, when will they get together? That was a very, very long, foreplay situation we had going there. My new book that I'm working on now, the love interest appears in chapter 3, and I think they're in bed by chapter 5. So I thought, I'm not going to do this again. This is that long thing. But the whole question of seduction in terms of sex, I also wrote those 2 vampire books under the name of Sam Cabot, and there sex and seduction was a very big deal because of the way the effect vampires have on the human body, is that they are very, very sexually appealing in our world, in Sam Cabot's world. But that's always been the vampire story anyway. The vampire story has always been about sex. Back to Dracula. I mean, it was when Bram Stoker wrote that. It's something, I think, that is infinitely complicated and therefore infinitely appealing. People will read about sex the way they'll read about death to see if they can make sense of their own feelings about it. And so whatever you write, somebody will say, oh, wait, I was in that situation. It is really a fascinating and an important part of, I think, the detective world.
So for you, is it just, and seduction is sort of, there's nuance and there's subtlety there to you. Do you equate seduction simply with whether they have sex or not, or or is it more about the chemistry?
Oh, it's much more about the chemistry. I went through 12 books on just the chemistry, where it's really all about how they react to each other, not what the end of that reaction will be.
And how about RG? How about you?
Well, I'm obviously I like all of us, there's romance in the books and things like that, but I'm really fascinated by the idea of seduction as part of the crime. And so in The Last Scoop, which is about a serial killer, most serial killers are driven by some sexual seduction thing. That's what they're killing for. In other words, most of my books aren't about somebody who murders to, get money, or they're robbing a bank, or, like basic things. You take someone like Son of Sam or Ted Bundy. I mean, it's not really, David Berkowitz never had sex with any of his victims, but he shot pretty women. So obviously there was a motivation. There was something going on. The same with Ted Bundy. I mean, he mostly had sex with women after he killed them, which is a whole other kind of thing. But that's the kind of thing I deal with in The Last Scoop. I have a character like that, a serial killer, who's not killing for any reason. He's not killing for money. He's killing for the thrill of it. And even if it doesn't involve sex, there clearly is a sexual element to it. And a lot of it involves power, this idea that you have power over this person of their life and death, and you can choose when they die. And so I deal with a lot with that in this book, and I've always been like fascinated by that in terms of covering serial killers, as a regular journalist.
Chuck, how about you?
Well, seduction is a really big part, but not romantic sexual seduction. I found when I started teaching, when I was doing the magazine work, and it's very different from this, being a newspaper man, because you have a lot more time. You're not doing breaking stories. And I started teaching, and I started to think about what I was doing, and I realized that every interview you do is a seduction. It's a little bit like a first date, too, a blind date. But it's also like a seduction because you're trying to get that person to cooperate with you, to give you information that you're looking for, or good quotes, great quotes. And it's the same thing with detectives too. So even if there's a certain amount of, if you like me, you're more likely to give me information. And if you don't like me, you're more likely to clam up. So I feel that in any kind of a detective or cops less so, but if they're good, and I've been listening to some really great true crime podcasts, and there was one of that, it's called Detective Trap, and it's a woman who she helped find serial killers, and when she would question these subjects in the room, she thought of it as a seduction. She would play a part. She would figure out what that person reacted to and then play that part. So I think seduction is a real part of it, but not necessarily romantically or sexually.
So let me ask, so continuing along this line, so with seduction, and so the femme fatale is a classic trope. Is it still relevant given today's hypersensitivity and wokeness? Or has its time come and gone, or is it still as relevant as it's ever been? Let's start with SJ.
I knew you were going to do that.
Yes.
I think the classic femme fatale was a woman exercising power in one of the very few dimensions she was given it. And now that women can and do exercise power in a lot of other ways, I think the femme fatale is not as relevant. But it's not a character who has vanished, and it's a character who has different meaning now. I don't believe I've ever used one, but I could be wrong. But there are still uses. There are still uses for all the tropes. It's just that the femme fatale used to be the only female character in a book, and no matter how many female characters there were, and Chandler is very guilty of this. There would be 3 or 4 female characters in the same book. Yeah. They would all be vamping all the men. But the character was always much more multidimensional than she was given credit for, and now even that character can explore her other dimensions in fiction.
Chuck, how about you?
Well, first of all, I think that femme fatale can mean different things to different people. I mean, the immediate image you get is that, woman who flaunts her sexuality. But in a way, I think that every woman is potentially femme and fatal. But it doesn't necessarily, again, have to do with sexuality. What you need in any book is conflict. And so the minute you put 2 characters in a room, especially if they're of different sexes, I think that you, unless you mess it up, there's a certain amount of conflict. And so in that old way that we think of the femme fatale, probably not. but in my broad definition of it. And what the first crime novel I ever wrote, A Swan's Last Song, starts out because I did it on purpose, because I wanted to deal with the trope, you know. And so it starts out with he's in his office, and this is very classic, and a beautiful woman comes in, an uptown woman, and you know she's going to be trouble, or else she wouldn't be there to start the book. So I think it's kind of a broad term, but if you don't have a woman or a man who's dangerous, you probably don't have much of a book.
It just, I just want to, I think what you said is great about everybody is dangerous to somebody. I just, in the old days, the only time a woman was dangerous is when she used her sexuality. Every other woman could be easily conquered.
Mm-hmm.
It was the woman who used her sexuality as a weapon who couldn't. That's what's no longer true.
Yeah, I think so. I actually wrote a book, I guess, about a femme fatale, but I didn't really think of it like that, because I sort of thought of it like what you both were saying. It's just an interesting character who happened to be a woman. But I wrote a book a few years ago called Blonde Ice, and basically it was about a female serial killer who was brilliant and incredibly smarter than most of the cops, and also very, very attractive and beautiful, and used it to kill people. But I was fascinated with the idea that there basically has never been a female serial killer. All the big serial killers of all the time, the Ted Bundys, the Zodiacs, the Boston Stranglers, you know, the Son of Sams, have always been male. Now, there have been women who kill a lot of people, but it's for insurance or Black Widows or something like that. The only one that even came close was Eileen Wuornos down in Florida, but that was a weird thing too, because she was a prostitute and she was killing clients because, you know, at first she claimed that they had attacked her. So I wanted to write a kind of like a serial killer who just happened to be a woman, but a really smart woman. I guess you'd call her a femme fatale, but like I said, I just thought that it would be an interesting twist, to write that, and it was actually a lot of fun to do.
So staying on this thread for just a minute, and while I agree with your various points, we've certainly evolved quite a bit as culturally, and certainly we're in a kind of a very hypersensitive kind of moment now in time. How do you feel about female characters, using their sexuality, and even if they don't even have sex with people, just kind of the hint of it, the tease of it, to sort of lure people, whether it's men or women, to get information, to manipulate them, to kill them, to capture them, to use that? Is it still sort of within fiction? Does that feel like fair game, or is it still kind of, you're sexualizing me as you're sexualizing the woman because that's the only way that she can kind of get what she wants? Or is it just a matter of how you handle it? I
don't think it is the only way she can get. What about mothering? What if you get a woman who's who's mothering and taking care of people? They can get a lot of what they want too. So I don't think it necessarily is all about sex. There are many roles that women and men can take. For man, maybe they're the father figure. So I don't think that it has to be sexual. It often is, but I don't think it has to be.
SJ?
Yeah, women use sex, or in the past have in fiction and in life, used sex the way men use power.
Right.
And it is the same game. I have something you want. For women, it's my sexuality. For men, it's this job I can give you or not, or whatever. It's an old trope, but it is one that can be successfully employed even now. You have to be careful with it because you don't want to use it as shorthand. She walked into my office and the only thing that kept her legs from going on forever was the floor. That's a cheap character. Now, it wasn't a cheap character when Chandler and that crowd first wrote her, but that was 70 years ago. A lot of stuff has happened since then, but it is still possible to use that character.
So just one more thread on this and we'll move on. So in violent crime tends to be more male dominated. but there are so many great female writers and female characters in crime and mystery fiction. Is it important that we have those distinctions, you know, female versus male, protagonist and antagonist, or is it just about tell a good story with good characters and I'll show up? SJ.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's what you just said. It's just, I try not to think too much about, you know, like, okay, this is a female to male. It's just make them interesting characters. But the one thing I wanted to say, which we sort of, you know, we're getting into in the last part of the discussion is, you know, like dealing with the changes that have gone on in recent years, and how the world today is completely different than it was 70 years ago when Raymond Chandler was writing his stuff, or even very different from 10 years ago. And this is always a balance, I know, in my books, because my character is a woman, but she's also a woman with power. She's the news director of a TV station, so she's kind of the boss. And so I deal with stuff like the Me Too movement and stuff. I mean, I try not to, you know, hammer people over the head with it. I don't make that the whole book. But you can't write about an office or a TV newsroom with all the stuff going on in the world, the Matt Lauers and the Bill O'Reillys of the world and all the sexual scandals. You can't write about a TV newsroom today and ignore that. And so my character has to deal with some of that stuff. And what I think is kind of interesting is because she's a woman and because she's in charge, she's seeing it from a little bit of a different angle, possibly. Yeah, I mean, I think it's very difficult to write a book today where you completely ignore all the events that, you know, are going on. And otherwise you're writing a book that, you know, look, if you want to write a book set in the 1970s or something, or the 1950s, you can get away with all that. I mean, that was the great thing about Sue Grafton. She wrote her books in the 1980s. She didn't have to deal with the internet. She could put people on payphones and all that stuff, which was actually really, really good because you avoided a lot of stuff. My books are all set in present day, so you have to deal on some level with present day issues.
So sort of shifting gears a little bit. So we've talked about character and plot. So secrets are the juicy tendrils of mystery novels. What's appealing to you, most appealing to you? Secrets about the plot, the character, or both? And let's start with Chuck.
I think it's both. I mean, you have to have characters have secrets. I mean, you know, it's you have to, because that creates the mystery. I'm not a big plot person, but I think that has to be a mystery too. And part of the reason I think that I write the way I do it's the way I write, but I figure that if I don't know what's going to happen next, the reader won't. So I think every book is the same. Every book is really a mystery because the writer is trying to get the reader to turn the page to find out what happens on the next page. And it doesn't have to be a murder. It can be a relationship book. You know, what's going to happen to these two people? Why, you know, so you have to have that. They're all mysteries. So I would say both.
How about SJ?
Yeah, I think that the secrets are all character secrets. They're all what somebody did once that they don't want known now. And that's what makes the plot. The plot, in our books, the plot always starts from someplace. And one question is, why now? And why now is usually because someone has just died, or someone is running for office, or someone has a new job, or something has happened that threatens to expose a secret from the past. Everything was going along fine until that secret was threatened. So the secrets are all character secrets that cause the plot to work and that create the plot secrets.
All right, we're going to go one more question, and then I just want to let everyone know. Hey, hang on, Chuck.
Because this is one of my favorites.
Go ahead.
In a book, which is, you know, because my character has lots of secrets, and because I'm writing in the first person, I love the idea of the unreliable narrator, where the character isn't really lying to you. She's telling you the truth. She's not telling you everything. And, you know, the classic books like that, you know, they've been great. I mean, in recent years, I mean, Gone Girl is, you know, maybe, the great example, because you're reading and the narrator's telling you stuff, but she's not, but either of the two narrators aren't telling you everything. And one of the great ones that I read years ago that I always loved is Presumed Innocent by Scott Turow. The movie's good, but the book is great. And the narrator knows what happened, but the narrator has not told you what happened as they're telling the story. And I love writing like that, and I love reading books like that.
All right, that was great. So we're gonna move on to another section. Just for everyone who's listening at home, feel free to send me questions for the panel and comments in the chat box, and we'll get to some at the end. So we are now going to go to a new section of the show, which is called, hang on, Spin the Wheel. All right, we have 7 categories in the wheel, some of which are my standards, plus I've added a few new ones just for this panel. And the categories include Year 1, Music Lover, Stranger in a Strange Land, The Butler Did It, Fear of Flying, Order in the Court, and Crime Doesn't Pay. I'm going to spin the wheel, and whatever you get is what you pay. What you play, SJ, we're going to start with you. You ready?
Oh, no.
Ready? All right, you got Music Lover. Okay, what piece of music or what song or piece of music, no matter how many times you hear it, you always love it?
Oh my God, I'm a classical music lover, and the Benjamin Britten cello sonatas do it for me.
Okay, right on. All right, Chuck, you ready? You're up next. All right, we'll spin.
What's the first question again?
Well,
you get a new question.
Oh, I see. I get a new question.
All right.
Wait for the spin, Charles. Yeah.
So this one is This is Crime Doesn't Pay. So and this is a new category that I created just for today. So, what's your favorite heist fiction or movie?
I've got a lot of heist movies, but I think the Michael Mann one, to Live and Die in L.A. Well, what's the name of the one that with De Niro and Pacino?
Oh, that was Heat.
Heat. That is probably the best heist movie.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, RJ, you ready? All right, last spin for you.
I guess.
See what we get. All right.
What
do you get? You got. All right, you got Stranger in a Strange Land. So, what genre of fiction that you have not written would you like to write?
I would like to write a Vietnam-based novel because I was in Vietnam many years ago, and when I got out of Vietnam alive, thankfully, I was going to write a kind of MASH kind of thing, and everybody in the publishing world says, "Oh, nobody cares about Vietnam. You can't write that." But I've sort of accomplished it in a bit. I haven't. My next book, which comes out in 2021, is sort of based on events that took place in Vietnam. But yeah, so that's always been my fascination, to take Vietnam, which was such an important part of my life and my generation's life, and to turn it into something contemporary today, and write an interesting novel about it.
All right, guys. Thanks, guys. That was fun. But given that we're all in the writing business, let's go to our advice column. So we're going to start off with Chuck. What's the best and worst writing advice in terms of crime and mystery fiction that someone has ever given you, or that you've heard given to someone else?
The worst advice is write what you know. That's the worst advice, I think. And the best advice, sit your ass down and write.
So why is write what you know the worst? Because this comes up a lot, and
for me,
that's a common response when I ask this question. So for you, why is that the worst?
Because I want to learn about something. I want to imagine something, and for me personally, it's easier to write if I imagine it. For instance, I can write better about places I've never been than I can for places I have been. I don't know why that is, but I can imagine them better. And it's easier for me to write. It's, for instance, it's much harder for me to write about New York City. I know it too well, and it doesn't really sort of spark my imagination.
I'm too close to it.
So I can, yeah, for me, and every writer's different, but for me, I'm better off writing about I will either interview people or research the places, but I'm better off writing if I haven't been there or if I haven't done it.
RG, how about you? Best and worst.
Well, I agree 50% with what Charles said, which is the best advice I've ever had, and the advice I give to everybody when they ask me about writing is just sit down and write it. Because I'm in journalism. I can't tell you, every journalist has a novel in them, supposedly, and they talk about it, and it's like, okay, sit down and write it. And there was a point where I did that, and I had to sit down and write it, and I realized this isn't that easy to do, but I did it. I don't agree with Charles on the not writing what you know, because that's what I've always done. I think the worst advice that I feel like people give and that I don't agree with, and it might work for some people, is people are always like, get beta readers, have everybody read your stuff, give you their opinions and all that. I got to be honest with you. There's a few people whose opinions I care about, my editor, my agent. I don't believe in this idea of, giving it out to 20 people and 20 people telling me what they like and they don't like. It's my novel, it's not their novel. I know what I want to say. So I'm not in this belief of this populist, let's hear what everybody has to say. If I respect somebody, I want to hear it. Otherwise, I write what I feel, and hopefully other people will want to read it too.
SJ, how about you?
Yeah, I tend to agree with Charles, although again only half. I think
write what you believe me, all of it.
I think write what you know can be great advice or terrible advice depending on what you think it means. I think that for people who think it means they have to write about someone just like themselves, that's a generally very bad idea. For people like RG who are journalists and writing about journalists, that's a very good idea because that's a world he knows intimately. But I think you need to write the book that you feel like you ought to write, not the book that you think somebody thinks you ought to write. In terms of great advice, I agree with both these guys. The greatest advice is to sit down and write it because, as Jan Burke once said, it's much easier to grow flowers in shit than air. Once you've written it, you can edit it, you can change it, you can rip it to pieces. But before you've written it, you have nothing to work with. So as RG said, he sat down to write a book and found out it was harder than he thought. You got to do it and then find out what it's like and then do it some more. I just want to make this point once more because, I'm a jock and we do this a lot, where you practice stuff. You have to practice it. You have to practice your shot. You have to practice your dribble. You have to run. You have to do whatever it is. You can't just do it because you decide you're going to do it. It's the same with writing. You sit down, you do it isn't good, so tomorrow you fix it, it gets better. So that is the best advice ever. Sit down and write it.
Can I just add something to, not add, but SJ and I are teachers. We teach writing too. And I don't know if you find that this with your students. My students, unless they have a class, will not write. And they're very talented, but they don't have the discipline to write without a class. And so I'm teaching one this summer. I'm not even charging them, but because they kept writing me, can I have a class? Because they won't write unless and they're really good writers, but they don't have that discipline. Do you have that? SJ?
I do. I find that, and I feel like I want them to sort of take off on that runway by themselves and not need to come every Thursday, but they feel like they need to. Mm-hmm. So,
but I have a question for both of you. I have a question for both of you because, the discipline is one thing, but I actually enjoy the writing experience. It's not just the discipline. I like writing. I know people are like, I can't stand it. I like the experience. It's something that gives me pleasure. I mean, do you both feel that way, or do you not like? I mean, I'm not like writing, but is it work? I even if it wasn't going to get published, I would sit down and write because I like to do it. I like to put the words down.
I do too. Until I get stuck. Until I wake up.
Well, of course.
When I wake up in the morning and think, oh my God, what am I going to do? I just don't know where to go today.
I'm not so sure I believe Dick about not doing it if he doesn't get paid.
Well, luckily he hasn't had to work on that yet. We don't. That has not been put to the test. I've done it without being paid. I've written a couple of books on spec because, God damn it, that was the book I wanted to write right then, and one of them has still not been published. And I might have to publish the sucker myself.
Exactly. We all have unpublished books, I think. Don't you? I mean, I have unpublished books, sitting there that have never gotten published, and I think most writers have,
Who was it, SJ? Maybe you know, or maybe Dick knows, who said, I don't like writing, I like having written.
Dorothy Parker, but she said a lot of stuff because it sounded good, not because it was true.
But yes, I don't believe that. I will do anything to avoid writing, but when I'm sitting at the computer, there's never a time that I don't enjoy doing it. It's just getting me to that computer.
That sounds like me working out.
All right, guys, this is good.
Right.
We got a couple of questions from the folks who are watching. So we'll start with SJ. So what is important in defining a mystery? Do you have to start with a dead body?
No, absolutely not. You hear that a lot. You hear that from teachers of writing, from editors and stuff, because it's a good shortcut. A dead body is a good shortcut to a hook. You need a hook in the beginning. You need a reason for people to read past the first page, because they're going to pick the thing up in the bookstore. They're going to go on Amazon, whatever's going to happen. They're going to read the first page and say, or they're going to read the first page and say, ooh, yeah, wow. The opening sentence of Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, last night I dreamed I went to Manderley again. This draws you right in. You don't need a dead body. If you have a dead body, it's an instant question. And but you do need something that big, that much of a draw, but you don't need a body, no.
How about you, Chuck?
I totally, only 3 books of mine have bodies, and 2 of them have the body, 3 of them before the story starts. So no one, so I totally believe that. I think that's not a cheap, but it's an easy way out. But what I think is really important, which SJ, you mentioned, is first line. The first line of the book has to sing to me, or I can't, the book won't work. I just need that first line. So for instance, the first line of the book that I finished that's being sent out now was, I woke up with a bad taste in my mouth. And to me, a good first line presents a question. Okay, why does he wake up with that bad taste in his mouth? And what's it? There are, to me, in a way, the best crime novels, if you didn't see the cover, you didn't know who the writer was, you could tell from the first sentence or the first paragraph that it was a crime novel. And you look at Raymond Chandler and all the greats, the first line or the first paragraph lets you know that you're dealing with danger or conflict.
So RG got another question. So
I agree with everything they both said. I mean, basically my feeling in terms of like a dead body in the beginning, it's fine if you do. I just think there should be no rules. I mean, you can write, you don't have to follow any format as long as it works. And yes, the first paragraph, the first page, the first line. I mean, I know myself, if I go in a bookstore, in the days when we could go in bookstores, you go in a bookstore and you pick up a book and you're browsing and somebody says, oh, that person's good. What do? You read the first page and you either get caught, you either like, I like this or I don't. Very, very, very infrequently that you're going to read the first 50 pages or whatever and then put it down. So you really need to grab the reader in the beginning. And it doesn't matter how you do it, but just telling them something that's like, I want to read this. I want to hear what this author has to say. And having said that, you can do it any way you want to.
All right. So we got one more question and we're going to wrap up. So we'll start again with you, RG, because you do a lot of this. So the question is, writing as a man, a woman, or a person of another ethnic group, yes, no, and how do you do it safely?
It's very difficult. It's an issue, and it's become an issue in current times. I've written 14 novels, and 9 or 10 of them I think have involved female characters, and the reason I did that is because I found it more interesting and challenging to write the female characters. They were really interesting. You got to understand, I go all the way back to like when I started writing the first time was like in the late 70s, and women really, were in a whole different position. A lot of women in newspapers were feature writers. They did recipes, cooking. They weren't out there, but I worked at a place, the New York Post, where there were all these great women reporters who were covering courts and crime. And I just thought as an author, that's a lot more interesting than just having some guy do it. And I've still felt that way. I work with so many great women reporters over the years, and that's what I try and capture, in my books. But yeah, there always is an issue, and there's an issue I know involving, well, can a white person write about an African American or a person of color? There's a lot of issues that have changed certainly over in current years, and as an author, you have to be aware of that.
How about SJ?
Yeah, I think that everybody should be allowed to write anything, but then you need to be judged on whether you did it well. And this is my position when anybody asks me, as people occasionally do, how can you as a white woman write Lydia Chin, who's a Chinese American woman? And my reaction is, I'm not talking about that. How can I? I'm not going to discuss that. What I will discuss is if you think I did it well, if I screwed it up, if she doesn't seem Chinese, that I'll talk about, and that is on me. But it is now has become a political issue, which I fully understand, because for so long, women and people of color were being written by white men, and now all of a sudden, people want to write in their own voices, and I totally get that. I won't stop writing Lydia for that reason, but I am glad that I started before the current era, as it were. And I also have to say that crime readers are much more generous than the readers in other genres that I've seen about this kind of thing, and are looking for whether you did it well, not whether you're allowed to do it at all.
Fair enough. All right. Thanks, guys. This was
Can I
great.
just say one quick thing about that? Because
Yes, go ahead.
Would you rather me not?
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, first of all, you have lived through it before, because when the Confessions of Nat Turner was published, so the 60s, there was a big outcry that he couldn't write a black character. But when that comes up, I give one answer, and that is Flaubert was asked, how can you write a book from the point of view of a woman? And he said, Madame Bovary, c'est moi. And if writers don't have if they don't have the right to write about any character they want, unless they don't do it well, and that's where I would agree. Right. So I did a Devil in the Hole has 25 characters. It has everything you can imagine. And the proudest thing I was of that book is no one said I don't believe that character. So anyway, that's just what I wanted to say.
All right. This has been a great hour. So before we wrap up, it's time for some shameless promotion. So Chuck, what do you got for folks? What do you want folks to know about?
Second Story Man. And the reason is it won Beverly Hills Book Award, and it was nominated for the Shamus the second time I lost. But it was because I was sitting next to Reed Farrell Coleman, and he's a jinx because he's lost 4 times. And our friend Matt Goldman was up for it this time, and he lost. So anyone who knows Reed loses. And also because I'm actually working on a spin-off of this, not a sequel, but a spin-off of this. So Second Story Man. All
right, RG, what do you got for us?
Well, the book that's just out is The Last Scoop. It came out in May. It's the latest Claire Carlson. And, like I said, this is about a serial killer that's the worst kind of serial Serial killer, somebody who's killed for 30 years and nobody even knows he's been doing it, and she puts it together. You know, the thing about this is there's going to be a couple. I'd love you to buy the hardcover, but there's a couple of promotions coming up in August. It's going to be a book pub pick for a week, and it's going to be an Amazon monthly Kindle for the whole month. So you're going to be able to get the ebooks at like a really low price, like I think 99 cents or whatever it is when they do it. So you know, you buy the hardcover now, but if you don't, in August, look at the ebooks.
All right, SJ, what do you got?
I have Paper Sun, which is Lydia Chin in Mississippi, and it'll be followed up this winter, early winter, I guess December 1st, I guess is the pub date, by The Art of Violence, which is Bill Smith, set in the New York City art world.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Chuck, SJ, and RG for a great show, and thanks to everyone who's watching. I'm your host, Russ Colchamiro, and since mystery is your game, you've come to the right place. I'm thrilled to announce, and if you like a little sci-fi in your mystery, like SD Rob and Philip K. Dick, I'm like to announce that my newest novel, Crackle and Fire, featuring my hard-boiled intergalactic private eye, Angela Hardwick. She's hired by a galactic accountant to find a missing intern and winds up in a dangerous game of cat and mouse with a madman from Earth who will stop at to get nothing what he wants. It is now available for pre-sale on Amazon as an ebook, with the ebook and the paperback available in September and published by Crazy 8 Press. Thanks, guys. You were great, and I'll see everybody next week.